Now, how many of you live in wolf country or just predators, wild dogs, whatever it is in general? We've seen some really good practices habitat-wise and really kind of your philosophy of what you do with a property to limit the destruction that wolves can cause on a given property. And a lot of times it's not necessarily a terrible destruction when they're coming through, but what it is, they'll displace deer. But I think there's some things in what I've seen that you can do to limit the impact that wolves have on your property based on what you do with your habitat. And you know, we're walking by a bunch of switchgrass right here, and this is part of it. It was probably about 15 years ago. I had a client in the western upper peninsula of Michigan, and what he'd done, and he was recommended to, and it was pretty poor advice, but he had about let's say a 7-acre food plot here, 10-acre food plot, and he surrounded the whole thing in really heavy switch. And then he had about a 7-acre bedding area. Now this bedding area for the UP of Michigan, it was pretty typical. You had an old field conversion that was coming in red osier dogwood, scattered red osier dogwood, a little bit of cedar, some spruce, a bunch of briars, and it actually wasn't a bad bedding area. Some of the deer would bed across the road in the neighbor's cedar swamp. So the advice was to turn that entire 7-acre field into all switchgrass, and now it'd just be this beautiful bedding area. The problem is deer don't bed in switch unless they're very limited on cover, say northern Ohio in a flat area, southern Wisconsin, like southeast Wisconsin, some flat open areas, northern Indiana. Those are just some of the areas, southern Michigan. But if you have a limited amount of cover, deer will bed there. Typically that's big open ag, and that's not wolf country. They'll bed there because they don't have cover, they don't have better cover, they don't have browse with cover, that's all they have to bed in. So they'll bed in there. It's not a good thing. It's because they're forced to bed there because of a lack of cover. When you take that switchgrass into wolf country, big predator area where deer have a lot of cover and they're not forced into areas, then what happened in that 7 acres, you plant switch there, now all the deer bed across the road in the neighbor's swamp. It displaces bedding. Because the way I look at it is a wolf can go on the downwind edge of that switchgrass field and they can pinpoint exactly, probably within a foot or two, where every deer is and game animal within that pocket of switch. That's a very bad thing. So what we find is in areas of northern Ohio, a deer can bed in an area the size of a pickup bed box and only see 5 feet, and that's okay. They have their space. They're used to being compartmentalized and jammed into space. When you go up to the UP of Michigan, most of those buck bedding areas, because we scout them for a living, they'll be in an area where they can see 50 feet, 60 feet, and they can see anything coming. So I can see, you can picture maybe a little hump of the cedar swamp in a cedar swamp, and they're sitting up on that hump, and now they can see 50 feet or more in every direction. Maybe it's a lone cedar out in a tag alder swamp. They'll bed under that cedar, and now they can look through a filter, look through all that tag alder. Maybe it's a clear cut. They'll sit on a little hump, but they can still see through that vegetation and that growth 50, 60 feet. That's the type of bedding area you have in those wolf country and predator areas. Think about visibility. That's why these heavy hinge cut areas, you can cut down, blow downs, things that we would even create in here. Some of the cuttings we have back here, the deer will bed in or around. They wouldn't bed in wolf country because it's too compartmentalized, too confining. Even seeing, I can think of an area in Minnesota where people had put these long bedding cuttings in an oak forest. We were out there, it's 10 degrees, there are a lot of wolf tracks. Every bed we found was on the downwind edge of that cutting strip, and they were at least 30 to 40 yards away. The reason for that is the closer they jam up to that heavy cover, let's say deer were bedded right here and they were tucked into this. Now they might prefer to bed like that in an average area where there's not a lot of cover. But when you get into wolf country, a deer does not want to bed here because they have to escape in this direction, that's it. So if a wolf comes at me from where Dylan's at and they sneak through and all of a sudden they're running it at them, they can get jammed up right in here. They can try to break their way through all that brush, and it's no different than about a bunch of cuttings. It could be so thick that a deer does not want to bed there in wolf country. And you can even see that. You'll see, think of about a 180-degree rule, that in bedding areas, deer typically don't want to bed unless they can at least escape in 180 degrees. And when you get into wolf country, they want to escape in almost 360, but at least 270. They want to be able to go in just about any direction, get out of there, and they want to have that visibility to see. That's why in those areas you can't have thick bedding. And when it comes to food sources, this is a nice little hunting plot that we're developing this year. You can see where I mowed down the switchgrass, I think in January. We already added a mock scrape right here, which is pretty cool. We already have the stand up right over here, and we'll plant this into clover. It'll be pretty easy. It's been a monoculture of switchgrass, so to kill the switchgrass that's coming up in here will be great. But what that means is, and as we've been driving through the switchgrass, there's a little bit of weed growth in here we're going to take out so it's thicker. Deer don't want to be in a small little hunting plot with one side all encased in switchgrass. No different than a bedding area of switchgrass. The difference is they're not going to have to worry about browse here, food's right here. But what I found in predator country is that when you have food sources with heavy switchgrass border, and that also extends to pines. I noticed on my property in the UP of Michigan, I had 3-acre food plot. And one side, about a third of that food plot, was all young pines and spruce that had boughs all the way down to the ground. Nebraska on the side of the plot would be this high on that edge. And when you got out into the middle, it was down to the dirt. And the difference is though deer, if they're feeding right here by heavy switchgrass, by spruce boughs, heck, even a big pile of logs. That's why I don't like piles of logs strewn around and on the outside and creating a horse arena effect around the food plot. Because deer don't want to bed next to this brush that's right here. That's a rabbit hut in there. They don't want to feed next to this switchgrass. When you're in predator country, here it doesn't matter. We're in mixed ag in southeast Minnesota. We don't have to worry about that big predator impact. We don't have wild dogs running around here. The coyotes aren't much of an impact on the deer herd, a lot less than a lot of you probably think. And then we don't have to worry about wolves. We don't have cougars here. Occasionally they talk about seeing one around here. But deer don't have to worry about a predator sitting right there and jumping out at them. So think about that with food sources. You don't want that thick edge. A filtered look is okay. If you look over on this side, that's a filtered look. Like for example, I can see about 30 yards back there. I can see 10 yards over there, 20 yards up there. That's okay in wolf country to have this filtered look. But when you have that switchgrass edge, just having it on one half right here would be enough to make sure that deer rarely use this because of that thick cover in wolf country where a wolf and a predator can jump out, and that's the predator effect. That also applies to bedding area, switchgrass in general. And then Dylan brought up a good point too. We talk about with predator control. It doesn't matter if it's coyotes, bobcats, cougars, wolves. One of the best forms of predator control is to provide small game. When you have rabbit huts, you have thick cover, you have good habitat, good whitetail habitat. Whitetails are creatures of edge. When you add up your property and you look at the outside actually measurement of your property. So on a 40-acre parcel, it'd be 440 yards times 4. That'd be your outside. If your inside edge, if you added up all the edge on the inside, all the different breaks in habitat, is not at least 5 times greater than that outside edge, you probably don't have very diverse habitat. And I'll show you the opposite of that is you just have all open hardwoods. That's really bad because you don't have much wildlife potential, let alone whitetail potential, because you don't have edge. Edge creates wildlife, creates whitetails. When you have a lot of edge and you have great whitetail habitat, then you're gonna have good wildlife habitat, and that means there's a lot of small game. It doesn't matter if it's rabbits, grouse, squirrels, mice, rodents, whatever it might be, you're going to have a lot of small game, and a lot of that small game is a heck of a lot easier to catch for especially coyotes, let alone wolves, than a whitetail. So create great abundant small game populations, give predators food in that manner, and you'll find that the impact on your whitetails is greatly reduced. And I'll add one final thing. I used to be a real estate appraiser up in the UP in Michigan for 11 years. And I'd go to properties up there that were next to a deer yard, and they were out in open hardwoods. So one person I went to up there to appraise their house, they'd shot over 80 coyotes that year from their house of coyotes out. They had blood on their back porch from the coyotes chasing the deer. Well, they baited the deer, thinking they're doing a good job taking care of 300 deer all winter long. Well, then those deer were just sitting ducks. It's like creating a bait pile for predators, whether it was wolves or coyotes. And that's a very bad thing. A lot of times, let those deer go back into the deer yards. The deer yards, they establish a network of escape trails with hard packed trails, and they just keep zigzagging back in there when predators come. If they're out in the open hardwoods, literally any one of those deer, a wolf can go eat anytime it wants to. So think about that. Those networks of trails in cedar swamps are incredible. When you're baiting them on the outside of that, it can be a bad thing and set up predators. That's a different matter altogether. But anyways, there's a lot of things we've seen over the years that you can do to reduce the impact. And I'll add one final thought. Northern Minnesota, I have not done this, but I've seen people doing this and I've heard about it. A good friend Brian told me about this, but when you have cornfields planted in those areas in wolf country, wolves come through, deer leave for a long time, but deer know about the impact of wolves and they're always wary of them. So they'll take their cornfields and they'll go above the cobs, because it's illegal to do it below, but they'll cut the corn stalks up above the cobs so that deer can now see through and around that cornfield a lot easier. They feel safer in that situation. And that's a way for deer to be feeding in the corn and utilize the corn a lot better than they would otherwise when they can't see through it as well. And so that was one thing that they do. So, oh yeah, don't let me forget, we've been adding this to the videos today. Camp Kicking Bear, our charity event, is on Father's Day. I believe it's June 14th on that Saturday. It starts at 10 o'clock in the morning, $250 for the Habitat Day. Every dime we raise goes to Kicking Bear. It is purely a charity event. In fact, this will be our 5th year, and we should definitely surpass 100,000 given to Camp Kicking Bear out of our event at our house here in 5 years. These last 4 years has been over 80,000. So we've been really happy to raise that money. It's a way that we give back. And Kicking Bear is an organization. Their mission statement purely is to get a bow in a kid's hand and lead them and their family to the Lord. It's been around for over 20 years. Ray Howell founded that. It's an incredible event. Kids are free at that event. We have a $100 raffle. We give away, there's 100 tickets for that. I raffle off one of my Matthews bows that I get every year. All our partners donate. There's some incredible door prizes at that. Check with Jessi. There's information in the description about that, but it's a great event. Again, every dime we raise goes to Kicking Bear. There's a lot of people that help out with that, volunteers. Space is limited, but I hope to see you there.